and welcome to Round Robin. I'm your host, Robin McCormick with the City of Hampton. And today we're going to broach a somewhat difficult topic. It is child abuse, but it's an important issue and one we need to take a look at periodically. My guest is from Healthy Families, our consultant, Alvean Lyons. Welcome, Alvean.
Hey, thanks, Robin.
You talk about a lot of child and parenting issues.
Absolutely.
This is a tough one. I think, there's a stereotypical image of what is child abuse, but you're going to tell us it's a broader definition, really, than what we might think of.
Absolutely. And considering that we're going into officially Child Abuse Prevention Month, it's important that we are thinking about the things that have global impact, not just local impact, and they change lives forever. What happens to any of us when we are children can really change the trajectory of our lives as adults. So it's important to pay attention to those. And as adults, our responsibility, particularly as parents, is to make sure that we keep our kids safe. And knowing how to do that, not just for our own natural-born children, but the kids of our community even.
Right.
Being able to pay attention to those. What are the signs? What does it mean? What is child abuse, really? And a lot of times we have very fixed definitions of what we think that is. We think of it in terms of sexual abuse.
I think that's the one that comes to mind first.
Absolutely.
You think evil predator from the outside.
Absolutely, absolutely. The great big boogie monster who everybody can see coming, and every responsible parent would know and can keep their kid away. And if something happened to your kid, you were being an irresponsible parent in some way because it's so obvious who the abuser is and what they would do where your child is concerned. But that's simply not true. It really, there's
it's a small minority.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And so today, the first thing we want to do, because we're going to talk about it in two parts, because it's a big subject. So in our first part, we're really going to talk about the awareness component when we're talking about child abuse. And three particular things. What is child abuse? Who is the abuser? And why does this happen?
Okay.
Even in our healthy communities, why does something like this take place? So starting first with what is abuse? Well, as you said, we tend to think of it inside of a box. We think, all in terms of sexuality or something very obvious in terms of physical abuse.
Right.
But the truth is...
broken bones, huge bruises, visible damage.
Indeed, indeed. And nothing covert. We don't think about it at all in terms of it being covert. We always think that it's going to be very obvious as well. So it is not true at all that that is the case. Child abuse can look like abandonment. It is still, to walk away from a child that needs you is still a form of abuse. What that does to children when they have no idea why their parents turn their backs on them, why their parents aren't there for them, why did they decide that they were not good enough? And that's often how a child interprets it, that I was not good enough or worthy enough to be loved, for someone to stay for me, changes how you interact in almost every area of your life. When the people who gave birth to you don't think you're enough, then how is anybody else in the world supposed to think that you're sufficient? So it changes so many things for people, even when they are grown, completely grown adults.
Now, when you say abandonment, I just want to clarify, you don't mean mom walks away forever necessarily. Obviously, that can happen.
Absolutely.
But it can happen in smaller
Absolutely.
increments.
And it can happen progressively. That first, whatever's going on in mom's life has become so significant, or dad's life for that matter, as well, because it's not unique to just moms, that has become so significant, so overwhelming, that it has now changed whether or not I'm present in my child's life. And it can start in small ways. First, I'm leaving this minor child home for hours during the course of a day.
Right.
Then it can be I disappear for days at a time. Then it could be weeks, and before you know it, I'm just completely gone out of the child's life. At that point, of course, typically social services would have stepped in, and we would have some kind of guardianship or some kind of government or local support where that's concerned. But the reality is it doesn't happen from 0 to 100 overnight.
No.
It's a very progressive process of disengaging where your child is concerned that eventually has physical representation in terms of time of absence. So yes, abandonment does have a whole continuum before we get to the point that someone else legally has to step in.
Right.
Absolutely. Then when you're talking about certainly sexual abuse, which is very obvious to many of us in terms of category, but not always obvious to many of us in terms of the kinds of things and the kinds of ways that those things can end up taking place. So we will get into that a little bit more in just a few minutes.
Right, in the who.
Absolutely, in the who's, exactly. Exactly. But sexual abuse is something that's experienced by more of our population than we realize, and particularly young girls. Now, it does happen, certainly, where young boys are concerned,
it does,
too.
and I think sometimes we forget that.
Absolutely, and we tend not to talk about it because of gender issues. You're less likely for a young male to admit to that because the shame factor relative to that particular gender and needing to be strong enough and being tough enough, defending yourself. Why didn't you protect yourself? It's a little bit different for boys in terms of the stigmatism than it tends to be for girls, but the impact is psychologically and emotionally the same. Just how we see it may look a little bit different. So then when we start moving into the physical abuse is not always obvious across the entire body, as you were pointing out moments ago, that it's not always broken bones and a black eye. Sometimes abusers are very particular about how they go about that physicality. So it's done in areas that are covered by clothing. So it's not obvious to a school teacher. It's not obvious to a neighbor what's happening because all of the bruises are in places that other people may not see. The other thing is that the kinds of unfortunate tortures that children can experience are so broad that it could be related to water. It could be, and there was a case several years ago where you had a parent that was, in order to punish their child, was having them drink water to the point of ultimately it drowned the child internally. So it's still physical, but it doesn't look the way that you think that would look.
Right.
So there are several things that could potentially happen. There are studies of parents who had their children kneel on cheese grates for hours at a time for not doing something that they were asked. Well, the likelihood that you're going to see that during wintertime with pants, highly unlikely. So here the child looks perfectly normal and everything's fine, but there's so much that's going on underneath the layers, both figuratively and literally. So considering the fact that physical abuse is not going to be something that walks down the street with red flags, we have to be far more engaged to know what that may look like. And then one of the other things I want to say is the willful allowing of violation to a minor child. You have situations where parents are aware that a child is being mistreated or abused by even a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a friend, and still they choose to remain silent. Even that silence is abuse. Not only is the child experiencing the actual abuse, but I am supporting the neglect and violation of this child. That is a secondary level of abuse where a child is concerned. So it is a very complex and broad and very serious issue, but we have to be aware that it goes beyond what we naturally think when we think about movies and television talking about the word abuse. It is broad.
It is broad. And so all of those are criminal violations.
Oh, absolutely.
And we will prosecute, but we've got to find them.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's the hard part.
Absolutely. And even when we talk about neglect, the one other one that I did not mention is not providing adequate food, shelter, or support for a child. Neglect can also, because it is considered abuse, even where neglect is concerned, there are elements underneath the neglect umbrella. So if I know that I cannot feed my child, but I'm doing nothing to ensure that my child gets fed, that's actually considered abuse as well.
Right, because we understand there are people without means.
Absolutely.
But we have
Absolutely.
community resources. People have to reach out. They can't
Indeed.
let their children be malnourished or go hungry.
Or not have proper shelter. And I understand the fear that a parent would have of being separated from their child. We are parents, we really understand that. But at the end of the day, what's most important is that our child has all of their needs met. And our responsibility as parents is, despite how we may feel, despite our fears, our concerns, our senses of inadequacy, difficult things happen to people all the time. And sometimes very tragic and horrible things can be part of that. But we are part of a community that does not have to be the permanent experience, and that does not have to be the shared experience for your child as well. That there are options that exist here in our Hampton Roads community that can ensure that your child is well, and that we will do whatever we can to help support you in coming back to a place of stability as well. Because it's always our intention to keep families healthy, whole, and intact.
And together. It is
We
generally
want that.
better for everyone.
Absolutely.
if you can do that and still provide and ensure for the safety of the child.
Absolutely. And the fear sometimes in sharing what the issue is that that will not be the case.
Right.
And that if somebody steps in, I will never get my child back again. But our city is committed to trying to keep our families healthy, intact, and together. So it is better for us to reach out and say, hey, I need help, so that our kids have what they need, and that we don't position ourselves to be considered in some kind of criminal position as a result of violating our children in such a way that it's considered abuse or neglect.
Okay.
So then we move to the who factor.
Right. What does a child abuser look like?
And what's so interesting is that there's no real profile. There's no such thing as being able to look at someone and say, oh, I know for sure. He or she must be. There's no such thing. Quite frankly, the cloak of appearing friendly, warm, part of the family, a supporter in the community, a coach, a teacher, a pastor even, quite frankly, abusers can literally span every element of our society.
And it is a gazillion times more likely to be someone you
Absolutely.
know than a stranger.
Absolutely. Because children are desensitized to people that they feel that they should be able to be safe with, which is why, and you and I have done a show in the past talking about keeping kids safe. And as parents, one of the things that we could do is make sure our kids know the difference between a friend of the family, an associate of the family. And so that we go through that process, because our kids assume, hey, mommy talks to Miss So-and-so all the time, or Mr. So-and-so all the time. He must be a friend of hers. And when children are small, they don't process that because everybody's your friend.
A friend. Everybody you know is your
we
friend.
We played together today. She's my best friend. You know, so we have to make sure that as much as we feel like sometimes it robs our kids of innocence, of having to know that they have to be careful about certain things, it also protects them. So it is better that we protect them than anything else. So being able to talk to your kids about who a friend really is. How does a friend really treat you?
Right.
Even if it's uncle or aunt so-and-so, what a healthy and safe and appropriate touch is versus one that is not. It doesn't matter whether or not we're family. Even within families, we know statistically that it happens more often than any of us would care to admit. So it's important that we're having conversations with our children from when they are young, so that they know as they get older to trust their instincts. I'm a big proponent for parents about not pushing your kids to do things that they feel uncomfortable with. And what I mean is, for instance, when our kids are small, we want them to be socially graceful. So we'll say, you know, give so-and-so a hug. We're getting ready to leave.
Right.
Oh, go give Uncle so-and-so a kiss. Come on, just, you know, you haven't seen your uncle in weeks or months or whatever it is. And if our child does not feel comfortable allowing that person into their space, we cannot train them to ignore their instincts.
Exactly.
And then think that as adults that they will trust their instincts later on. It is important that we teach our children manners. So, of course, we would say, you know, we're getting ready to leave. Say bye to everybody. That's totally appropriate. It was nice to see you. It was nice to meet you. But it's not, your kids are not required to allow people into their physical space that they don't feel comfortable with.
Right.
So that when they know that that is true, that it's okay for me to respect you from there, and I don't have to allow you in here, then I can trust myself to make decisions about how close you should be. And I'm also far more aware that when someone violates that line, my red flags go up. And I am more likely to say, I don't like him, Mommy, or I don't like her, or she makes me feel funny. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
As a parent, our kids are always telling us a truth. We need to make sure that we care enough, we prioritize enough, that we're not so busy that we can't hear their little truths, because those truths are building huge stories. So we always need to be listening. So where that who factor is concerned, the who is anybody. We just have to make sure that we're doing what we can as parents to ensure that our kids trust themselves enough and trust us enough to be able to recognize it and say something about it whether it's for them or they notice something strange where their peers are concerned.
Okay.
And then finally, the why. Lots of times people have no idea. You know, he seemed like such a good guy. You know, I thought he was a doctor. You know, like we just kind of think that somehow.
Some people are fine or
right,
too good
that they
or
would
whatever.
be above that. But what we don't know is each other's stories. We don't know what each of us have been exposed to as children.
And that's a huge, I mean, one of the things about child abuse is that it perpetuates. If you learn that as a child, if you learn that violence, that's your instinct on how to parent when you grow up.
Even when intellectually you may know that I remember that pain, I hated that feeling, I hated that experience.
I'm not going to do that.
I will never let that happen. Patterns, and that's why we talk about the importance of parent education all the time. You have to interrupt patterns of behavior. And the only way to be able to do that is to make sure that you are exposed to new information, new strategies, new techniques, new principles that help to create a new normal on the inside for you in order to respond differently where your own children or other children are concerned. So it is super important that we make time to invest in opportunities to grow in those kinds of ways. You and I talk all the time about the benefit of healthy families.
Right, the different classes and workshops that they have.
That are there, and they make a world of a difference in things even as significant as this. It's not just the super soft stuff that are still very important.
Right,
but we deal with every layer that is involved in really making sure for the total health of a family. So our Strengthening Families classes are fantastic in order to be able to support those. Building better relationships. What's going on at the top levels affects what goes on at the bottom.
Oh, there's so much stress in life these days.
Oh, goodness gracious, truly. So it's really important that when you think about how you want to spend your time, when you think about ways in which you can show your children how much you love them, being informed, not even just for your own, because some of us are doing a great job with our kids, and there's no question about it, but we can still all grow. But sometimes it's even learning so that I can be an asset to children that are not even my own biological children.
Which we need to do in this community. We absolutely need to do. There's so much need.
We have to feel like we are our brother's keeper.
Right,
you know,
right.
Our community is just an extension of families. So when we come together and recognize that what goes on for your kid should matter to me, not in me overstepping my bounds to tell you how to raise yours, but for me to care that things are well with you all and are well with your child, because I understand that your child is part of our community family. So when we start looking at the notion of what child abuse prevention looks like and the awareness factors and all of those, we need to be fully clear about the what factors involved, what is it, the who factors involved, how do you identify or who could potentially be, and then the why factors. There are so many contributing factors to that. And what I didn't mention very briefly is substance abuse can easily contribute because you are not yourself when you're being controlled by a substance. Get help for that. A
lot of the problems, and again, you get back to the neglect or the abandonment, that can cause that withdrawal. So even if you're sort of trying, you're not
right.
there. You're not really
you are
present.
not you anymore. That substance has taken over, and that is no longer your life. We need to get that life back.
Financial stress, work stress. I mean, I think that sometimes parents feel forced to leave their child with someone they may not really feel great about because they don't have a lot of options. But again, we can help with that.
There are things we can do. We can really be in this thing together.
So contact Healthy Families.
Absolutely.
Look into classes. I'm going to ask you again. I'm seeing the blue pinwheels this year, and that is our reminder, right?
Yes, that we are in Child Abuse Prevention Month, and we want to remember our kids that there is so much that we can be doing for our communities, but we want to keeping ourselves aware and awake to these issues, make a world of a difference, and us being active in the process. So our pinwheel garden in front of Hampton Healthy Families office itself, the building itself, is beautiful, absolutely adorable, and planted by our own community. So we always encourage people to stop by, take a look at how beautiful it is, but while you're there, come in and sign up for a class.
Right.
Because even if you're doing great, like I said, it might be something that is beneficial to someone else in your community.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Oh, absolutely. It's such a pleasure.
And thank you for watching. I know this is a difficult topic, but those pinwheels and designating a month of awareness helps us remember the sort of childhood innocence of pinwheels and the darker side and how we can be attuned to it and help prevent it. Thank you for watching.